Imagine this. It is October 5th, 1789. The sun has set over Paris. Rain falls in sheets over the cobblestones. And 7,000 women are marching. They carry pikes, pitchforks, muskets seized from the city armory. Some drag cannons through the mud with their bare hands. They have walked 12 miles already. Their feet are bleeding. Their children are starving. And tonight, they are going to drag a queen from her bed. This is the night the monarchy lost its independence. The night that proved that crowns are only as heavy as the people allow them to be. This is the night Paris ate the rich. To understand what happened on this night, you must first understand two worlds, separated by just 12 miles. The Palace of Versailles. A sprawling complex of gilded halls and manicured gardens. Home to King Louis XVI, his queen, Marie Antoinette, and a court of nobles who had not set foot in Paris in years. 12 miles away, the slums of Paris. Overcrowded, disease-ridden. And in the autumn of 1789, desperately hungry. Now, historians continue to debate some details of what follows. Contemporary accounts vary, and revolutionary newspapers were not above exaggeration. But the core events are well documented, and where sources conflict, we will note the uncertainty. France in 1789 was in crisis. The nation was essentially bankrupt, having spent its treasury supporting the American Revolution and fighting endless wars. Half the government's revenue went simply to paying interest on debt. And then came the weather. The winter of 1788 was among the harshest in memory. Rivers froze, crops failed. A massive hailstorm in July had destroyed harvests across northern France. By spring of 1789, the price of bread had doubled. An unskilled worker in Paris might spend nearly 90% of his wages on bread alone. Bread was not a luxury. It was 3/4 of the average diet. When the bread ran out, people did not switch to alternatives. They starved. The bakers' shops had lines stretching entire city blocks. Women waited hours, only to be told there was nothing left. Rumors spread that some bakers were bulking their loaves with fillers, sawdust, chalk, whatever might stretch the dwindling flour. Meanwhile, at Versailles, the banquets continued. This was the world that produced the infamous phrase often attributed to Marie Antoinette, "Let them eat cake," or more accurately, brioche. But here we must pause to separate myth from history. There is no credible evidence that Marie Antoinette ever said these words. The phrase actually appears in Jean-Jacques Rousseau's Confessions, written in 1767, attributed to an unnamed great princess. At that time, Marie Antoinette was 10 years old and living in Austria. She would not arrive in France for another 3 years. The quote was not even attributed to her until 1843, 50 years after her death. But the myth persists because it captured something people believed to be true, that the royals were utterly disconnected from their suffering subjects. And in that perception, there was truth. On the 1st of October, 1789, the officers of the King's bodyguard held a banquet at Versailles. It was, in one sense, routine. The Flanders Regiment had just arrived from the north to reinforce the palace guard. Welcoming banquets were customary when military units changed their garrison. The opera house filled with officers and guards. Wine flowed freely. The royal family made a brief appearance, and the soldiers rose to toast their health with drawn swords. What happened next depends on who you believe. According to the radical newspaper L'Ami du Peuple, edited by Jean-Paul Marat, drunken soldiers tore the revolutionary tricolour cockades from their hats, threw them to the floor, and trampled them underfoot. Some reports claim soldiers urinated on these symbols of the revolution and replaced them with white cockades, the colour of the old monarchy. Whether this actually occurred remains disputed. Official accounts make no mention of cockade desecration. Some historians suggest the story was exaggerated or fabricated by revolutionary press seeking to inflame public opinion. But what mattered was that Parisians believed it. The newspapers portrayed the banquet as a drunken orgy, an obscene display of royal excess while the people starved. By October 4th, crowds were gathering in the streets, and anger was reaching a breaking point. The city was a tinderbox. And on the morning of October 5th, someone struck the match. Dawn broke cold and grey over Paris on Monday, October 5th. In the marketplace of the Faubourg Saint-Antoine, women gathered early, as they did every morning, hoping to buy bread for their families. But this morning, the shelves were empty again. By 7 o'clock, a crowd had formed outside the Hôtel de Ville, the city hall. They demanded that the municipal government do something about the bread shortage. When no satisfactory answer came, the women began to riot. They broke into the building. They ransacked offices. They seized weapons from the city armory, muskets, pikes, even several small cannons. And then someone shouted a proposal that would change history. "We march to Versailles. We will make the king answer." A man named Stanislas Maillard emerged as their leader. He was a minor officer in the National Guard who had participated in the storming of the Bastille 3 months earlier. He was rough-spoken, but respected. The women trusted him. By mid-morning, the crowd had swelled to perhaps 7,000 people. The vast majority were women, many of them market vendors and fishwives from the city's poorest quarters. But men joined too, some disguised in women's clothing to avoid detection. At around 10 o'clock, they began to march. The route from Paris to Versailles covered 12 miles of muddy roads. Rain began to fall and did not stop. The women marched in their work clothes, carrying whatever weapons they had managed to find. As they passed through villages along the way, more people joined. The column grew like a river gathering tributaries. Behind them, the Marquis de Lafayette, commander of the National Guard, hesitated. His soldiers wanted to join the march. Lafayette knew he could not stop them, so he chose to lead them instead, hoping to prevent violence. By evening, thousands of National Guardsmen were following the women toward Versailles. 6 hours after they departed, the vanguard of the crowd arrived at the palace gates. Versailles had never seen anything like this. The sprawling complex of palaces and gardens, built to awe visitors into submission, was now surrounded by thousands of rain-soaked, hungry, furious citizens. The king had been out hunting when the crowd arrived. He returned to find the gates besieged. A delegation was permitted to enter. 6 women were chosen to present their demands to the king. Their spokesperson was a 17-year-old girl named Pierrette Chabry, selected for her polite manner and modest appearance. But when she stood before Louis XVI, Pierrette fainted at his feet. The king, by most accounts genuinely kind-hearted if indecisive, ordered smelling salts brought immediately. He helped the girl rise. He promised the delegation that he would order grain from the royal stores to be sent to Paris. Some of the marchers were satisfied. Maillard himself returned to Paris with news of the king's promise, but thousands remained. They did not trust promises. They had heard promises before. As night fell, the crowd surrounded the palace. There were no shelters. The rain continued. Inside, the royal family waited, sleepless, listening to the crowd's chants. Bread, bread. Lafayette arrived around midnight with his National Guardsmen. He negotiated with the king. He posted guards. He assured the royal family they were safe. Then he went to bed. It was a mistake that would haunt him. Paris newspapers would later mock him as General Morpheus. At around 6 in the morning on October 6th, a group of marchers discovered an unguarded gate. What followed was chaos. The crowd surged into the palace. They stormed through corridors, overrunning guards, shouting that they would find the queen and kill her. According to eyewitness accounts, some cried, "We are going to cut off her head, tear out her heart, fry her liver, and that will be the end of it." Marie Antoinette had only minutes' warning. She fled barefoot in her nightgown through a secret passage connecting her chambers to the king's apartments. She pounded on the locked door, unheard above the chaos, for several agonizing minutes before being admitted. The guards who attempted to defend her quarters were overwhelmed. At least 2 members of the royal bodyguard were killed. Their bodies were mutilated, decapitated. Their heads were placed on pikes. Lafayette finally managed to restore order by deploying his National Guardsmen to clear the palace corridors. But the crowd outside was not satisfied. They demanded that the king show himself. Lafayette convinced Louis to step onto the balcony. When the king appeared, something unexpected happened. The crowd, which moments before had been a murderous mob, erupted in cheers. Long live the king! The people did not yet hate Louis himself. Many still believed he was a good man, poorly advised, manipulated by his Austrian wife and corrupt nobles. Then the crowd demanded the queen. This was the most dangerous moment. Marie Antoinette had been the target of vicious propaganda for years. Pamphlets accused her of everything from adultery to treason. She was called Madame Deficit. There were those in the crowd who wanted her dead. Lafayette brought her to the balcony with her 2 young children. The crowd began to jeer. Some raised muskets. Lafayette told her the children must go inside. The crowd wanted her to face them alone. For several minutes, Marie Antoinette stood on the balcony, hands crossed over her chest, silent, while the mob below screamed at her, muskets pointed at her breast. And then Lafayette did something extraordinary. With theatrical timing, he knelt before the queen and kissed her hand. The gesture was so unexpected, so gracious, that the crowd fell silent. And then, incredibly, they began to cheer. Long live the Queen. The moment passed. Violence was averted, but the crowd had one final demand. The king must come to Paris. Louis agreed. He had no choice. At around 1 o'clock in the afternoon on October 6th, the royal procession departed Versailles. The king, the queen, their children, and over 100 deputies from the National Assembly rode in carriages surrounded by perhaps 60,000 people. The procession was bizarre, triumphant, macabre. National Guardsmen hoisted loaves of bread on their bayonets in celebration. Market women rode astride captured cannons singing songs, and at the front of the procession, carried on pikes, were the severed heads of the royal bodyguards. The crowd chanted as they marched, "We bring the baker, the baker's wife, and the baker's boy." The baker, the traditional nickname for the king, whose duty it was to ensure the people had bread. The journey took most of the day, roughly 9 hours through mud and rain. By the time the royal family arrived at the Tuileries Palace in Paris, night had fallen again. As he departed Versailles, Louis reportedly asked his minister to try and save my poor Versailles. He believed he would return. He never did. The October days, as historians call them, marked a turning point for the French monarchy. From this point forward, the king was effectively a prisoner of Paris, subject to the crowds, the committees, the forces that had dragged him from his gilded cage. Versailles emptied out. Iron locks were placed on the gates. Guards were posted to prevent looting. The palace that had symbolized royal power for over a century fell silent. Its political life was over. Decades later, it would be reborn as a museum. 3 years after the October days, in August 1792, the monarchy was formally abolished. In January 1793, Louis XVI was executed by guillotine. 9 months after that, Marie Antoinette followed him. The women who marched to Versailles got their bread, at least for a time. More importantly, they proved something that would echo through the centuries, that power ultimately rests not in palaces or crowns, but in the hands of ordinary people willing to demand it. The October days were not clean. They were not noble. Guards were murdered. Heads were paraded on pikes. A queen was terrorized. But they were effective. Some historians argue that the violence of the revolution discredited its ideals. Others argue that meaningful change has always required the threat of force. This debate continues to this day. What is not debated is this. On the night of October 5th, 1789, 7,000 women walked through the rain to demand justice. By morning, the world had changed. The gates of Versailles stand open now. Tourists walk through the Hall of Mirrors, marvel at the gardens, pose for photographs. But if you listen closely, you might still hear the echo of drums, of marching feet, of voices crying out across 2 centuries. Bread, bread, bread.